We take you now to London. Hi, this is Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and I just got done reading a book called The Murrow Boys, which is something I would highly recommend you read. You need to understand where the news business of 2018 from whence it came. I was almost going to say came from. But I've been influenced by Edward R. Murrow and Eric Sevareid and Winston Burdett and William Shire and Larry LeSueur and Mary Marvin Breckenridge to use more proper language. Bill, Steve, this was actually an interesting thing for me because I expected the halcyon days of radio to be celebrated for back when the truth was told and people didn't show their bias and have opinions, but it was quite the opposite. In fact, a lot of these guys, the names of whom I've just mentioned, were fairly open leftists. And in one case, Winston Burdett actually sat before Senator McCarthy's committee in the 1950s and acknowledged being a member of the Communist Party and a Soviet spy for a while, who named names in front of that committee. And yet there's something about the early days of radio news that I wish to recapture. And Stephen Green, let me pose this question to you. Because we have come to see news as show business. And that really came with the advent of television in the late 1940s, 1950s. And, you know, the whole reason why guys like Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather existed, for those of you who remember them, and the people, whoever they are today who are doing the news, of course, nobody knows who they are now. But the reason why they existed was their ability to put across something in video form, not their ability to think, to report, to speak clearly, not their focus on the word itself, but rather on imagery. What changed about the leftist reporters in radio compared to the leftist reporters in TV? Like, why do we look back fondly on guys like Ed Murrow and his boys, but look today at the TV reporters and think, it's just a bunch of leftists?
George Bush left office in 2009 utterly humiliated, and now his approval ratings are up there with Obama, so time kind of heals all that. But there is still some meat to your question. Let me tell you one of my coming-of-age political stories. CBS, 60 Minutes, wanted to do this hit piece on President Reagan back in the early 80s. I think it was 83, 84. His re-election was coming up, so they just wanted to absolutely smear the guy, right? So they sent Mike Morley Rooney out to Reagan's ranch in California, talking about all of these horrible things and cutting this interview to make him look like an idiot. You know, the same stuff they tried with Sarah Palin back in 2008. But the most of the video, the B-roll, was Reagan riding his horse, tossing bales of hay, chopping wood. And after the segment aired, I think it was Mike Deaver, was Reagan's media guy. Deaver calls up, what's his name, who ran 60 Minutes, and thanked him for the piece. Thanked him for running that hit piece. And the reason was people aren't going to remember the nasty things you said. They're going to remember watching Reagan sitting on the horse, tossing the bales of hay, chopping the wood, just looking like a real American damn hero. And I think what has happened between the left then and the left now is the left was using the news to make a point that maybe they believed in. But now the news is an excuse for propaganda, and there's a world of difference between the two. And the other thing I'd just like to say is I think TV cameras have been the absolute ruination of news. There's too much pretty, there's too much star power, and not enough actual reporting.
You know, Bill, the other thing that came through in this book, The Murrow Boys, that I read, is the fact that almost all of these characters, including Eric Sevareid, who went on to some fame as a commentator on TV news. If you're of a certain age, you can remember him.
I am.
You know, Sevareid, for example, was riddled with insecurity. Most of the guys who were part of Murrow's Boys were, to one degree or another, philanderers who were unfaithful to their spouses. Many of them were hard drinkers. They were almost all heavy smokers. They were, you know, there was like this sort of hard-bitten edge to them. And what struck me about Severide was before he got into the news business, he and his buddy decided that they would go on a little adventure. So they decided to row a canoe like 2,200 miles up the Hudson River or something from wherever he lived in the Midwest. They went all the way like to the ocean, and as an adventure. But for some reason, he was paralyzed by putting a microphone in front of him. It made me wonder what we don't know about the people who are on the air today, who look so cocksure and confident, and you think should be respected and because of who they are behind the scenes. It was a mess in many ways, yet some of these guys turned out some of the best reporting on World War II ever. How do you balance that, what you're seeing or hearing now, Bill, with the very human factors that make these people's lives, in many cases, disasters?
Well, first of all, we're seeing what kind of people these news people are, and Matt Lauer is a great example of it, and all the rest of these, people who are our moral superiors and so on. One of the things I think about the modern press corps is that the press corps is so addicted to this view of themselves generated in the 40s, usually 30s, 40s, and 50s, kind of film noir guy, and he's got his fedora on, he's got his little press card in his hat, he's down on the street, he's wearing shoe leather and all the rest of this stuff, ferreting out the story and all that. So I think the people, I hope I don't butcher this too badly, but the difference between the people who were reporting in the 40s and the reporters today, I think, as Winston Churchill said, is that the reporters today have all of the virtues that I despise and none of the sins that I admire. And basically, that's it. They're images of these guys, and they're still coasting on the image of the tough-bitten reporter, who's working his beat. This is how they see themselves, but they're a victim of their own propaganda. These people today are no match for them. And I think the main reason that they've lost so much respect is no matter what their politics were. By the way, I find it kind of interesting that reporters, the guy you mentioned, is admitting he was a Communist Party member and also a Soviet spy. I'm sure he was a big part of the McCarthy is leading the world into ruin because of this crazy witch hunt, which has no basis in reality whatsoever, except for my, being a spy for the Kremlin. But these people today have none of that. The point I was going to make is that at least those people, Scott, they knew whose side they were on. They knew whose side they were on. And Ernie Pyle, and I know he's a print journalist, not a radio journalist, but these embedded reporters knew whose side they were on. It was either Murrow or Shriver. I want to say it was Shriver, but it may have been Murrow, who were reporting from Britain, reporting from London mostly during the early stages of World War II in the 30s, late 30s and 40s, mostly in the 40s, and up until our involvement in late 41. And this one reporter, again, I wish I knew it was either Murrow or Shriver, but I'm pretty sure it was one of those two.
Probably Murrow.
Was sending back reports that were actually significantly moving the needle of public opinion towards the British and against the Germans. I remember one small fragment of a report he wrote. It had something to do with he was looking through the glass and he could see the fires of London burning through the red specks of blood or something that were on the window. And it's like, that's communication. It's opinion, but it's opinion with a moral core to it.
The effect of the radio broadcasts of Ed Murrow from London and to a lesser extent William Shirer from Berlin
That's what it was, yeah.
had a tremendous impact on American public opinion at that time because they were reading newspapers. And, as Bill's pointed out before, there were lots of newspapers in most major cities. And you had all kinds of opportunity to hear what was going on. But when you hear the sirens of London and you hear the tramping of the feet as Ed Murrow stands outside a shelter where people are filing in, and he literally pauses for a moment so you can hear the sound of footsteps on the street, and so that he brings you there. Murrow had a genius that I think a lot of audio and video reporters have lost today, and that is the ability to tell a big story with a small picture.
just to tell a story. That's
Yes.
just what I was going to say. They were telling stories that were based on fact, and these people today are offering opinions that are based on nothing. And there's a big difference between a story and an opinion.
He told one of his reporters, he would tell all of his reporters, he recruited this team, and he was really responsible for shaping almost all of radio news for a period of 25 years during its heyday, and then much of television news going on after that, because many of those guys transitioned into television and became the exemplars. As you pointed out, guys like Dan Rather lionized Ed Murrow, but were nothing like them. The radio guys thought Walter Cronkite and guys like Dan Rather were essentially clowns and bumpkins compared to real reporters who would go out there and develop sources and gather the news. These were cue card monkeys. These were guys who were sitting in front of a camera looking pretty and wearing makeup. And, when Murrow took you there, or when Bill Shirer took you there to Berlin, public opinion shifted substantially in a very small period of time from that war is none of our business to we need to fight. And the U.S. government, frankly, can thank Murrow's boys in large part for making that happen. But what struck me about the thing was this idea of telling a big story with specific detail. He would say to his reporters, don't tell us that the streets are running with blood in Copenhagen or wherever that you happen to be. Say, the police officer that would wave to me every day when I walked down the street wasn't there today. And, just like these fine little subtle details, he says, don't oversell the story. At one point, Bill Shirer was talking to Ed Murrow and said something to the effect of, I want to report the news from Berlin, and if nothing's going on in Berlin, I want to say that too. And Ed Murrow's answer as his boss was, I think people will find that refreshing. I think people will want to know that. I would love to see a half-hour news broadcast stop 16 minutes in when the anchor says, we don't really have anything worth talking about today beyond this. But you got to fill the time. So that's what I love about this show, this free form, where we can stop wherever the muse stops, and we can bring you our opinion as it is. I encourage all of you to read this book, The Murrow Boys. You won't find all of it admirable, but you will see in it the roots of what we're experiencing today and maybe a way forward. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.